a warm welcome to you. A welcome not only from my own behalf, but also from the president of Srijan, Mr. Harlalka, and from all members of our poetry team. And already you have a booklet with you, which we had sent. We call it a chapbook, in which the introduction of each and every one is given. So you would be able to know from that who all are participating. I can now give an official thank you to all the participating poets today. This evening is a very special evening. It is the month when our country had celebrated its 75th Independence Day. On this day, in 1947, the historic speech Jawaharlal Nehru had given. I will just read a line or two from that speech, which started with, quote, "Long years ago, we made a tryst with destiny, and now the time comes when we shall redeem our pledge. At the stroke of midnight hour, when the world sleeps, India will awake to life and freedom. A moment comes, which comes but rarely in history, when the soul of a nation long suppressed finds utterance," unquote, etc. This was a speech whose truths resound more every day, even today, nearly a century later. And this is what our poets today will give utterance to that awakening, that life, that freedom. But before that, Srijan shall also remember another path maker in the world of poetry, and that is Ted Hughes, who was born in the year 1930 on 17th of August. And to help us remember him is another luminary, one of the most famous of them, Sobha Chattopadhyay. Now, we remember her fondly because her long career of nearly 50 years as professor of English, a career during which she has won even the hearts of many of us Srijanites, and that with a charming brilliance. Today, she's here because with a special thanks and help of Professor Krishna Sen, who is also constantly nursing Srijan in each and every poetry adda of ours. And we do acknowledge our indebtedness. Srijan also feels immensely blessed that our team includes such exceptional high priests of culture and literature, like Raju, Raman, and Syed, Kawsar, Jamal. These two have volunteered to carry the evening forward for us. Raju, Raman, or S.V. Raman, for 3 decades managing everything in Max Miller Bhavan or Goethe Institute in Kolkata. That was a period when he had won the hearts of all Srijanites by gifting to us German poets visiting Kolkata, who have become a part and parcel for us and even keep on being in touch with us. This Raju Raman is also a consultant with Victoria Memorial Hall, as well as a number of other very, very important institutions. And for us in Srijan, he has played a special role, being very closely associated with FFSI, or the Federation of Film Societies, ever since Satyajit Ray himself had been its president, because he has been taking care of our Srijan Film Club every month, and under his aegis alone, we have done screenings every month of the best films which the world has has directed and produced. And even now, for the last 3 months, we have started this online. Today, therefore, it is my honor to invite uh, Raju as well as Jamal. As you all know from the booklet which is in your hands, Jamal had been handling programs at All India Radio for decades and had started writing and publishing poetry in Bengal ever since he was 20. And he himself also now has over 15 or 20 books of collections. And since many, many years, um, Jamal has been taking care of introducing Bengali poetry to Srijan and has kept this flame burning within us. Even French poets, Cecile, he's one of us. If you remember, he was here, he was there when you had last come. And Jamal himself has translated French poetry from 1950 to 2000 in a recent publication, which he calls Phorashi Kobita. Um, but before I hand over the evening to Raju and to Jamal, I would like to just end by a small quote from what Seamus Heaney had said, just to bring focus back on the poet of the month. He had said, quote, "No death outside my immediate family has left me feeling more bereft. No death in my lifetime has hurt poets more. A great arch under which the least of poetry's children could enter and feel secure. His creative powers were, as Shakespeare said, still crescent. By his death, the veil of poetry is rent and the walls of learning broken." To such a Ted Hughes, Raju and Jamal, please take over and please conduct the proceedings from now onwards. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Basant. That was quite an elaborate prologue to the evening, I must say. And you did introduce me as some kind of a high priest. And I was just wondering that I haven't had a drop of any drink for the last 5 months. How could I be a high priest at this moment, right? So that is a kind of a misnomer here. But as we have already lost a lot of time in connectivity and this and that, so I would like to say that we plunge straight into the focus of the evening and the poet of the month, that is Ted Hughes. So may I have the pleasure of inviting Sobha Chattopadhyay to deliver her, if I may put it in inverted commas, keynote address for this evening, for which we have earmarked 30 minutes. And we have to do a lot of time management because there are many poets waiting to read their own works here. But I would like to briefly introduce Sobha Chattopadhyay to the audience for those who are not familiar with what she has been doing. She has been teaching at the Jadavpur University for over 42 years and was the head of its Department of English from 2001 to 2003. She did her PhD on Graham Greene in the year 1980, has edited the many worlds of 20th century literature and also Jadavpur University Essays and Studies. To her credit are a lot of authoritative and oft-cited articles in over 13 national and international publications on the very best of literatures, including Graham Greene and several others. Also, she has written on Dalit literature, partition literature, etc., and has presented over hundreds of papers at international conferences and seminars in India and abroad, had been invited at the University of California at Berkeley and the University of Colorado at Boulder, Colorado College, United States of America. But what she very fondly remembers is being able to supervise 15 PhD dissertations and 35 MPhil dissertations. And unfortunately, even in this large number of 35 plus 15, if my mathematics goes right, makes 50, I unfortunately could not figure in those 50s. It would have been a blessing of some sort. So, may I request Sobha ma'am to kindly take over and present her address for this evening. Are you there, Sobha ma'am?
Yes, I'm here.
Yes, and as I told you, we have to do some time management. So please don't get annoyed if I give you some kind of a warning after 20-25 minutes to say that
I will try to make it within 30 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Raju, very much. And thank you, Basant, for your very kind introduction and also for inviting me to talk to you. Now, I straight go to Ted Hughes, since without much ado, uh, I should be talking about the British poet Ted Hughes, one of the greatest poets of the 20th century, Poet Laureate of England from 1984 to 1998. Born on 17th August 1930, he died on 8th October 1998. I must warn you at the very beginning that Ted Hughes, with his fascination for violence and near obsession with death, was a powerful and alarming combination of tremulousness and force, and harsh, disjunctive lines deliberately distant himself from the more easy and acceptable kind of poetry. His poems contain much that is both admired and disliked, intriguing energy and passion, offering immense possibilities of study and interpretation. I must just tell you that repeated tragedies and loss of loved ones may have intensified his morbid tendencies. In 1956, he married the American poet Sylvia Plath. The couple moved to USA in 1957 when he published his first collection, The Hawk in the Rain. However, Plath committed suicide, killed herself by gas asphyxiation in 1963 after they had separated in 1962. The shock so numbed him that he wrote no poetry for the next 3 years. In 1969, his domestic partner and companion, Weville, actually Asia Weville, killed herself and her daughter Shura. These unhappy events must have cast a shadow on his life and his disposition towards probing into darker issues. Thereafter, he married Carol Oland, and the couple lived together from 1970 to his death, 1998. And after that, he published prolifically Wood War 1967, Crow 1970, Cave Birds 1978, Moortown 1979, and ending up with Birthday Letters 1998, where he addresses his relationship with Plath after years of silence. Today, I shall be reading with you three of Hughes's poems: Ghost Crabs, The Hawk in the Rain, and the well-known The Thought Fox. But to understand Hughes and these poems, we have to go back a little to modern British poetry in the 20th century. Sorry, please bear with me. Modern poetry, as you all know, was the invention of a brilliant generation of French poets. Without going into all those details and without much ado, if we consider modern British poetry, we have to take the First World War as a convenient starting point. The sum of un, the sum of concentrated human misery and destruction seemed unprecedented, and Wilfred Owen, who had a prolonged experience of trench warfare at its most savage, was one of the first to tell the truth about war from the soldier's point of view. Actually, today it is well acknowledged that Yeats and Eliot occupy the focal points of any account of British modern or modernist poetry, trying to deal with the welter of discord that was modern life, expressing their new modernist sensibility and their violent, disjointed worldview through a new poetic idiom. On one hand, they try to achieve a symbolic fusion of outer and inner landscape based on the methods of the symbolists. On the other, they actually seek to move towards coherence through the mythical method. The Wasteland, 1922, has been generally accepted as a symbol of disillusionment and loss of values, characteristic of the 20s. And we all know about the characteristics of modernist poetry: introspection, experimentation with new forms, imagery from other subjects like anthropology and folklore. Incidentally, Ted Hughes was very much interested in these subjects when he was studying at Cambridge. The other characteristics being ambiguity, plurality, open-endedness, leading to multiple interpretations. When we look at the Great Depression years and crisis-ridden 30s, the wasteland seems to become a tangible reality. Life became literally a wasteland, as obvious in the poetry of the Auden generation, Auden, Spender, Macnish, and Daly. The public world outside and social, political, and economic issues became the focus of attention in their poetry. But every movement is followed by a counter movement. After the Second World War, after the visionary poets of the 40s and 50s, till the mid-1960s came the movement poets. Philip Larkin, the most significant of them, writes, quote, "I have no belief in tradition or a common mythicity or casual allusion in poems to other poems or poets. It's a reaction against Eliot's and Pound's concentration on tradition, heritage, culture, and common fund of mythology." In Larkin's poems, we all know poems like Church Going or the Whitsun Weddings, there is a combination of wistful sadness, amusement, respect for the commonplace, and a deep compassion. I think it is against this movement poetry, sober, rational poetry of real life visions, that Ted Hughes seems to be reacting. And his poetry can be understood when set against and contrasted with the movement poetry of Larkin and Tom Gunn. Writing for an audience not so literary, Hughes seems to share ideas with other poets outside his country, especially in East Europe. Hungarian poet Janos Pilinski or Yugoslavian Vasco Popa. He is out to shock his readers, pull the readers to a space where he can focus his energies, producing an urgent warning with an acknowledgement of common danger. Thus, he carries his readers to a totally different territory of violence, primordial struggle, primitivism, instinctiveness, and the world of myths and folk tales. Hughes' use of language is quite different from that of the movement poets. As against their precise and relaxed diction, one marks the urgency of the rhythms, insistence on warning words, densely packed with metaphors. Relationships between images seem to be mysterious, uncertain, and often a source of imaginative power. Innovations somehow are mainly in respect of actually the rhythm and image. Hughes appeared to have been influenced also by some of his literary ancestors like Hopkins, Lawrence, Dylan Thomas, and the American poet John Crowe Ransom. His rhythmic peculiarities are difficult to analyze. As an example, let me read out Ghost Crabs. Could I request you to put it on the screen?
Please.
Yes, Rajuda, we can.
Okay, fine.
Fine. Let me read out. At nightfall, as the sea darkens, a depth darkness thickens, mustering from the gulfs and the submarine badlands to the sea edge. To begin with, it looks like rocks uncovering, mangling their pallor. Gradually, the laboring of the tide falls back from its production. Its power slips back from glistening nacelles, and they are crabs, giant crabs under flat skulls, staring inland like a packed trench of helmets. Ghosts, they are ghost crabs. They emerge, an invisible disgorging of the sea's cold over the man who strolls along the sands. They spill inland into the smoking purple of our woods and towns. A bristling surge of tall and staggering spectres, gliding like shots through water. Our walls, our bodies are no problem to them. Their hungers are homing elsewhere. We cannot see them or turn our minds from them. Their bubbling mouths, their eyes, in a slow mineral fury, press through our nothingness, where we sprawl on beds or sit in rooms. Our dreams are ruffled, maybe, or we jerk awake to the world of possessions with a gasp, in sweat burst, brains jamming, blind into the bulb light. Sometimes, for minutes, a sliding, staring thickness of silence presses between us. These crabs own this world. All night, around us or through us, they stalk each other, they fasten into each other, they mount each other, they tear each other to pieces, they utterly exhaust each other. They are the powers of this world. We are their bacteria. Dying their lives and living their deaths. At dawn, they sidle back under the sea's edge. They are the turmoil of history, the convulsion in the roots of blood, in the cycles of conquerors. To them, our cluttered countries are empty battlegrounds. All day they recuperate under the sea. Their singing is like a thin sea wind, flexing in the rocks of a headland, where only crabs listen. They are God's only toys. Actually, some important aspects of Hughes's poems are, first, though animals are being described, they suggest their human counterparts, death enveloping them. Second is the experience of death vis-a-vis survival. Third is the theme of war, including mental and physical degradation. In Ghost Crab, the poet's wonder-mixed dread of awesome predatory creatures from real life or fantasy surfaces prominently. The crabs overwhelm our consciousness. They own the world like a packed trench of helmets. The crabs look like helmets from above. They may be dangerous and murderous like soldiers in trenches. They remind us of the First World War, war in Western Europe, coming on inland to English coast. And they spill inland, that is how Hughes described. They emerge at the seaside, and those lines, famous lines, a bristling surge of tall and staggering spectres gliding like shots through water. Our walls, our bodies are no problem today. Them, their hungers are homing elsewhere. And again, these crabs own the world. All night around us or through us, they stalk each other, they fasten into each other, they mount each other, they tear each other to pieces, they utterly exhaust each other. They are the powers of the world. The crabs actually, as physical horrors multiply, seem to be transformed. Crabs, the actual crabs, seem to be transformed into shots gliding through water. These strange creatures, driven by their relentless violent energy, totally dominate humans. Their deadly nature puts us at their mercy. The poet thus compares the life of crabs with those of human beings. We are their bacteria dying their lives and living their deaths. Hughes himself called Woodbow, quote, a descent into destruction. The poem explores and evokes a feeling for hidden mysteries in the universe. What is the idea behind Hughes's crabs? They are forces operating in and upon human life, powerfully draining the energy from us. They use us to perform functions not our own. We are entangled and compromised with them. These forces are outside us in history, visible inside us. Also, they are the turmoil of history, and also they are in the roots of blood. Incidentally, there's an open rush of sound towards the second half of the poem and towards the end. A rocking motion is produced. The long line the long line is to them our cluttered countries, our empty battlegrounds. All day they recuperate under the sea. Their singing is like a thin sea wind flexing in the rocks of headlands. That is followed by the last two lines, where only crabs listen, they are God's only toys. This gives additional force to the earlier poem, menacingly abrupt and final. The poem is quite representative of Hughes's poetry, particularly the concern with violence, growth, entanglement, the predatory nature of animals, the empathetic power, and the fusion of the world outside and inside. I next move to the second poem, The Hawk in the Rain. Could I request Rajuji to show it to us?
Right.
I
Go
read
ahead.
out. This is a shorter poem written in 1957, taken from the collection with the same title. I drown in the drumming ploughland. I drag up heel after heel from the swallowing of the earth's mouth, from clay that clutches my each step to the ankle with the habit of the dogged grave. But the hawk, effortlessly at height, hangs his still eye. His wings hold all creation in a weightless quiet, steady as a hallucination in the streaming air. While banging wind kills these stubborn hedges, thumbs my eyes, throws my breath, tackles my heart, and rain hacks my head to the bone. Hawk hangs the diamond point of will that pole stars the sea drowner's endurance. And I bloodily grab day's last moment counting morsel in the earth's mouth, strain towards the master, fulcrum of violence, where the hawk hangs still, that maybe in his own time meets the weather. Coming from the wrong way, suffers the air, hurled upside down, fall from his eye. The ponderous shires crash on him, the horizon traps him, the round angelic eye smashed, mix heart's blood with the mire of the land. Two important aspects strike us as distinct marks of Hughes's poetry. First, again, the myth of the First World War, the disaster of the Second World War, and the resulting sense of dislocation brought to an European. Second, his awareness of nature, something that his fellow city-bred English poets like Larkin and the movement poets had forgotten about. In this powerful, evocative poem, he underlines the contrast between the animal and the human, the two worlds of violence, that of men and that of animals, are brought face to face in direct conflict with each other. The reader is made aware of the grace and power that distinguishes the animal movements from the clumsy posturings of the human counterparts. The heaviness of the vowels, the repetition of the consonants in the opening stanza emphasize man's struggle against hostile nature, ungainly, ugly, and ineffectual. I drown in the drumming ploughland. I drag up heel after heel from the swallowing of the earth's mouth, from clay that clutches my each step to the ankle with the habit of the dogged grave. As the animal and the human are different in life, so are they in death. While words like drown, drubbing, swallowing, clutches, and dogged grave are associated with man, the hawk is associated with hands, wings, weightless quiet. The hawk submits to an earth-shaking, violent encounter with death at the end of the poem. Though the word death is not mentioned, its overpowering presence is palpably felt through words like crash, trap, smashed, and blood, associated with man, bringing out the superiority of the ultimate encounter of the bird to the pitiable plight of man. Death, in most instances, comes as a result of a violent encounter. Now, just 5 minutes more. The last poem, The Thought Fox, and this is 1960. We have a wrong date here. It's not 1957, but 1960, because Lupercal was published in 1960, and this poem is taken from Lupercal. May I read out? You can share the scene, The Thought Fox. Now, this is actually the most well-known of Hughes's poems. First, let me read it out. I imagine this midnight moment's forest. Something else is alive beside the clock's loneliness and this blank page where my fingers move. Through the window, I see no star. Something more near, though deeper within darkness, is entering the loneliness. Cold, delicately, as the dark snow, a fox's nose touches twig, leaf. Two eyes serve a movement that now and again, now and now and now, sets neat prints into the snow between the trees, and warily a lame shadow lags by stump and in hollow of a body that is old to come. Across clearings, an eye, a widening, deepening greenness, brilliantly, concentratedly, coming about its own business, till with a sudden sharp hot stink of fox, it enters the dark hole of the head. The window is starless still. The clock ticks. The page is printed. Now, as we read it, we also find that it is about a poet's search for an appropriate language to embody his intuitions on the nature of existence and poetry writing itself. A good poem, according to Hughes, is an organism, quote, an assembly of little parts moved by a single spirit. There is also a vital relationship between hunting and poetic creation. The poet himself talks about this relationship. This, I thought, was very important, where Hughes is actually talking about this relationship. I quote from Hughes. The special kind of excitement, the slightly mesmerized and quite involuntary concentration with which you make out the strivings of a new poem in your mind, then the outline, the mass and color, and clean final form of it in the midst of general lifelessness, all that is too familiar to mistake. This is hunting, and the poem is a new species of creature, a new specimen of life outside your own. Elsewhere, it is even more interesting. Hughes says, in some ways, my fox is better than an ordinary fox. It will live forever. It will never suffer from hunger and hounds. I have it with me wherever I go, and I made it. The emphasis on possession underlines the theme of capturing in the poem. The way in which the fox is held between the opening and closing lines, thus trying to imprison the livingness, that's Hughes' word, the livingness of the fox. The fox enters from darkness and disappears into darkness. We are left with the cloths, the only. We look further into the darkness, out of which the thought fox had stepped. The unavoidable forces of darkness, which have given, actually, they have grown too much for the poet to handle, making writing itself difficult. Hughes observes, almost all, again I quote from Hughes, almost all the poems in Lupercal were written as invocations to writing. My main consciousness in those days was that it was impossible to write. Incidentally, I end up with Shimasini as Vasant started. He was an admirer of Hughes, and he notices the noise of consonants, entering, clicking, printing, and the monosyllabic consonantal shooting of the bolts on the fox in the last stanza. With a sudden sharp hot stink of fox, it enters the dark hole of the head. This is quote from Heaney. The entire sound arrangement of the poem is an engagement with livingness. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. That was wonderful. That was, to put it in a word, mesmerizing. Now I can imagine that when you took attendance in class, it must have been present, all of them. I think they hardly bunked your classes. You see, because
One of my students is here, Roma.
Yeah, Roma, of course. Yeah, and Roma is a very regular feature at the Srijan, at all the events over there. Thank you very much for giving us this very, very useful insight into Ted Hughes. I must say that, my interest in Hughes was kindled at a point when the British Council in Calcutta had organized an evening on Crow, which was published in 1970. And there are certain images that we associate with certain cities. And in that manner, also, the tram or the yellow cab or the crow is very much part of the Calcutta landscape and also soundscape, right? So when this was brought together and pointed out, because because I came to learn later on also that the Crow that Ted Hughes wrote was also inspired and written in the first poems were written in response to a request by American artist Leonard Baskin, right? And we in Calcutta had an artist, still have an artist, Shubha Prasanna Bhattacharya, who is fascinated by the crows, and he has done a lot of paintings of the crows. So this particular evening was an evening where Shubha Prasanna's paintings of the crows were juxtaposed with Ted Hughes's poems on the crows, and that's how my interest was kindled about Ted Hughes, and did a lot more reading about him later on, and found him really, really fascinating. Great. Thank you very much.
Thank
We
you
have to
for giving me
we
this
have to
opportunity, and
we
I
have to
thank
move
the
on, and
audience.
yeah, and after the initial technical handicaps and glitches, it went off wonderfully. So it's perfectly all right. Good. So let us pass on. Jamal Saib achen to?
Yeah, I am here.
Jamal Saib, এইবার আমরা একটু বাংলায় যাই, বাংলা
হ্যাঁ,
কবিতায়। রাইট।
নিশ্চয়ই নিশ্চয়ই।
অ্যান্ড মোটামুটি একটা আমরা অ্যালফাবেটিক্যাল অর্ডার ফলো করছি, যাতে কেউ প্রেফারেন্সিয়াল ট্রিটমেন্ট সেইভাবে না পায়। তো অ্যালফাবেটিক্যাল অর্ডারে তাহলে আমরা হায়দ্রাবাদে চলে যাই। চৈতালি চট্টোপাধ্যায় আছেন তো এখানে? সো জামাল সাহেব, আপনি যদি ইন্ট্রোডিউস করে দেন চৈতালি চট্টোপাধ্যায়কে।
দেখতে পাচ্ছি না কেন?
ভিডিও অন করলাম তো।
আচ্ছা, ওকে ওকে। হ্যাঁ,
দেখতে পাচ্ছেন না? হায়দ্রাবাদ অনেক দূর, তো সেই জন্য দেখতে পাচ্ছেন।
চৈতালি চট্টোপাধ্যায়, সবাই নিশ্চয়ই ওর কথা জানেন। বাংলায় কবিতা লিখছেন দীর্ঘদিন ধরে, মানে 80s এর শেষ থেকে সম্ভবত। আর প্রচুর লিখেছেন, অনেকগুলো বই, গল্প উপন্যাসে ও বেরিয়েছে, অনেক লেখা। এছাড়া এমনি সংবাদপত্র, রেডিও, টেলিভিশন সব জায়গাতেই ওর উজ্জ্বল উপস্থিতি। বাইরেও গেছেন। আর বাংলা কবিতা যারা লেখেন তাদের দু একটি কখনো কখনো পুরস্কার তো জুটে যায়, কিন্তু চৈতালির অনেকগুলো পুরস্কার। যেমন আমার সামনে আমি দেখছি বিষ্ণুদে পুরস্কার, উদয় ভারতী ন্যাশনাল অ্যাওয়ার্ড, প্রসার ভারতীর ন্যাশনাল পোয়েটস, উপেন্দ্র কিশোর রায় চৌধুরী অ্যাওয়ার্ড বাই গভর্নমেন্ট অফ ওয়েস্ট বেঙ্গল, এটসেট্রা। আর কবিতার বই তো অনেক। বিজ্ঞাপনের মেয়ে ওর খুবই পরিচিত কাব্যগ্রন্থ। এছাড়া আছে বান্ধবীর ডায়েরি থেকে, অ্যাসাইলামের সকাল, এফআইআর, ইত্যাদি ইত্যাদি। নাও over to Chaitali Chattopadhyay. She will be reading her poems in Bengali.
খালি এক কথা আর আমি অ্যাড করতে চাই যে আমরা কিন্তু চৈতালির কবিতা খুবই ভালোবাসি, সাথে সাথে কিন্তু আমি একটা লিখেও ছিলাম। উনি যা গান করেন, অসম্ভব ভালো গান করেন।
আজকে কি বসন্তের গান শোনার ইচ্ছে হয়েছে?
Good evening everybody, and thanks the entire Srijan team for giving me this opportunity. Well, actually my poems are not directly connected to independence, but they're kind of, and they're subjective. Okay. স্বাধীনতা। ধরো মুঠিতে পাকিয়ে নিয়েছো মিহি আঁশওয়ালা তুলট কাগজ, চাবুক অক্ষরমালা। ধরো জল ভেঙে ভেঙে তুমি পেয়ে গেছো অশ্বক্ষুরাকার দ্বীপ, তার ছেঁড়া মাস্তুল চিহ্ন আর পেতে রাখা উনুনের শিক সমেত। আজও আবার কোনো শবযাত্রার শেষে তোমাকে হাতছানি দিয়ে ডাকছে ঈষদুষ্ণ কেতলি, ঝুপসি হয়ে আসা সন্ধ্যের মানুষজন। আবহ জুড়ে হেসে উঠছে শিশু। ধরো গুঁড়িয়ে দিয়েছ সেই পতাকার সিনথেটিক রং, আর কানাগলি উপচে ওঠা জাতীয় সঙ্গীতের ভার। পরের কবিতা। অ্যাকচুয়ালি স্বাধীনতা তো রাষ্ট্রের যেমন হয়, তেমনি স্বাধীনতা মনের, মানুষের, ইচ্ছের, ভাবনার। এই কবিতার নাম ফেরা। অর্ধেক আকাশখানি ভরে গেছে রক্তে, বেত্রাঘাতে। নয়ন জলের মধ্য দিয়ে কেউ স্বাধীনতা চায়, মধ্য নিশীথে কেউ কেরোসিন পুড়িয়ে কাল চিহ্ন এঁকে নেয় বুকে মুখে। কিন্তু এ অপমৃত্যুর গল্প কার জন্য? বাংলাদেশের বোকা মেয়ে আমি, মুক্তি চিন্তা কি দেবে আমায়? আজ চাই অন্য জল, চাই নৌকোখানি তার অন্ধকার লগি ঠেলে ঠেলে অভিমুখ ব্রাহ্ম মুহূর্তের ভোরে ফেরাক আলোয়। আমার শেষ কবিতা। এটাও একটা স্বপ্নের কবিতা, স্বপ্নেরও তো স্বাধীনতা থাকে, এটা সেরকমই। ইউটোপিয়া। আমি সে পাখিটিকে স্বপ্নে দেখে থাকি, যে সাদা ভোরবেলা শিরীষ গাছটির আবছা ডালে ডালে কেবল বলে চলে, গেরস্তর ঘরে কোলালো খুকি হোক। অমনি বেজে ওঠে ফুর্তি হুল্লোড়, বংশে বাতি দেবে যে মেয়ে, তার মুখ গিনিতে দেখে নিতে মানুষ জড়ো হয়। মানুষ কখনো ডাইনি বলে আর আধলা ইট তুলে ছোড়ে না ওর চুলে। ছিন্ন কুসুমের মতন মেয়েদের ভাসে না বৃতি আর মশলা ধোয়া জলে। হয়তো কোনোদিন স্বপ্ন মনে হয়। থ্যাংক ইউ অল এগেন।
অনেক ধন্যবাদ, খুব সুন্দর। স্বপ্নের তো স্বাধীনতা থাকা উচিত, কারণ স্বপ্নের স্বাধীনতা হচ্ছে সবচেয়ে মধুর স্বাধীনতা, এক ধরনের মধুর স্বাধীনতা, কারণ এক জায়গা থেকে আরেক জায়গায় চট করে চলে যাওয়া যায়, স্বপ্নের কোনো বন্ধন নেই সেইভাবে। পরের ডাক হচ্ছে দিল্লি চলো। হ্যাঁ, তো দিল্লি চলো করতে গিয়ে আমরা আভা আয়েঙ্গারের কাছে চলে যাব। উই আর মুভিং অন টু আভা আয়েঙ্গার ফর her poem in English. Abha Iyengar is a poet who has won the Kota Press Anthology Contest in USA 2003, and she was featured poet at Prakriti Foundation's Poetry Festival 2010, and had recently read at the Auroville Poetry Festival in 2019. She has 8 published books to her credit, with her recent collections of poems titled Yearnings. She was also longlisted for the Kamala Das Poetry Award in the year 20, and Parvaz, her poem film, has won the special jury prize in Patras in Greece. There is a more detailed note on her in the chapbook, which you might like to read up later. But we will move on to Abhaji straight away for her poems in English.
Thank you so much for this opportunity to read a poem. I'm really thrilled because actually my education goes back to Calcutta, and now of course I'm Delhi based, but I was at Modern High, so I have good memories of Calcutta. The poem is, It All Depends. As we live in the 21st century, more tongues are locked, more homes are sealed, more people are declared anti this or the other, and put behind bars for the smallest of things. It may not be a misdemeanor at all, but it depends on who is looking at you. A woman may be jailed for killing a cockroach. You needed to let it live, they will proclaim. You may snigger. It sounds ridiculous, but it may come to that. As we live in the 21st century, we have to be careful with comments on social media. It may not be a misdemeanor at all, but it depends on who is reading your words. You are speaking against God, a body may proclaim, and you may be incarcerated for this before you can say, Maaf karo, I did not mean that at all. You appear shocked. It sounds ridiculous, but it may come to that. As we live in the 21st century, we have to be careful. You may be living in a fascist state, but there is a difference here. You like to call it a democracy. The lines are tight against mouths wired shut. Don't speak, and if you must, speak not the truth as you know it. but what is acceptable of late. It may not be a misdemeanor at all, but it depends on who is listening to your words. As we live in the 21st century, we have to be careful. Regimes rule each country. What is at front? A wagging tongue. What is at the back? A scheming mind, hands rub in glee, taking out ghee with twisted, crooked fingers. It is only a matter of degree how much they'll turn the wrench on a humanity already bleeding. Men will beg, standing on one leg, clutching at dignity denied. Driven insane, fall at the feet of those causing the pain. It may not be a misdemeanor at all, but it depends on who is holding the reins. What freedom, what progress. As we live in the 21st century, we are living in the dark ages of a future time. Nothing changes. We still have to be careful of speaking our minds. Thank you.
Great. Wonderful. If that is not calling a spade, I wouldn't know what is. Wonderfully expressed. Thank you very much. So, Jamal bhai, এইবার একটু হিন্দি কিংবা উর্দু কবিতায় যাব?
Hindi.
হ্যাঁ, হিন্দিতে
Hindi
যাই।
will be better.
হ্যাঁ। তো তাকে আগে ডাকবেন আশুতোষ জিকে?
Yes.
প্রিয়াঙ্কর জি আছেন কি? প্রিয়াঙ্কর জি हैं?
प्रियंका जी just called me saying that he'll be a little late.
Okay.
तो उन्होंने मुझे कहा है आशुतोष जी को वेलकम करना और उनको इंट्रोड्यूस करना। आशुतोष जी आपको बहुत बहुत स्वागत। हमारी आपने आज स्वीकारा हमारे यहाँ आना। एक बार पहले भी आपने शायद 2 बार हमारे यहाँ आप आ चुके हैं। आपकी कविता हमें याद भी है। आशुतोष जी is an activist writer. He's a postgraduate in Hindi literature as well as a PhD in an associate professor at Vidyasagar College for Women. Ashutosh has been writing for decades, not just poetry, but also essays on literary and social themes, short stories in respected journals around the country, especially Samaved, Ang Champa, Kissa, Sablok, Dastak, etc. Of importance is his 9-volume anthology of Jayaprakash Narayan, Bihar movement. And of course, there's lots of things to share, but he has also read on radio and television and is a highly rated and sought after panelist in many programs and talk shows all over the country. आशुतोष जी आपका हमें आपके बारे में बहुत कुछ हमें याद है और शायद आज सृजन में सब कोई है वो भी आपको सुन चुके होंगे। आपके सामने आपके साथ 3 मिनट है स्वाधीनता के ऊपर जो भी इच्छा हो कहें।
मेरी एक अभी की कविता है, उसका नाम अपना देश है। मेरा देश इतिहास की यात्रा कर रहा है इन दिनों। उसकी आंखों में रेत गड़ रहे हैं, स्मृतियों के कपाट खुलने लगे हैं। व्याकुल रह रहकर आंखें भर आती हैं, सामने का दृश्य अगोचर हो जाता है। बहुत दिन नहीं हुए 18 दिनों का वह भीषण युद्ध अभी अभी समाप्त हुआ है, जब नैतिकताओं के सारे मानदंड ध्वस्त हो गए। पानीपत हो या पलासी, उसका मन कभी नहीं हारा और पराजय उसकी जिजीविसा दुर्दम्य और अडिग अपने सत्व की छाती को संभाले हुए वह बचा रहा। जंजीरों में उसका मन कभी नहीं बंधा। मुक्ति की भूमि वह जानता है, मुक्ति के लिए अकेले चलने की संस्कृति से वाकिफ है वह। दीपंकर, श्रीज्ञान, कबीर, बुल्ले शाह, नानक, गांधी की अमर भूमि है वह। मेरा देश भारत लाल पीली नीली आंधियों के बीच घिर गया है। वे उसके आकाश की प्रशस्त सुरमई नीलिमा को लीलने बढ़ी आ रही हैं। दुर्दिन के मेघ गरज रहे हैं, सागर में तूफान है। मुक्ति का अग्रदूत आलोक व्रती वह जानता है, प्रकाश तिमिर को आत्मसात कर लेगा। यह पहली कविता है। और एक कविता और पढ़ सकता हूं कि हो गया समय?
एक लंबी कविता है कि छोटी कविता?
छोटी
तो
कविता
पढ़ लीजिए।
यह कविता बहुत छोटी कविता है, लेकिन इससे अलग है। देश ही है यह भी। यह देश है। एक देश में कितने कितने देश हैं। मेरा देश उनका नहीं है, उनका मेरा नहीं। हम सभी अपने अपने देश के लिए लड़ रहे हैं। एक देश दंगों की बुनियाद पर बनता है, एक जाति की भीत पर। एक देश बाईपास गुजर जाता है, एक आत्महत्या करते किसानों की बस्ती से गुजरता है। एक देश में आलीशान इमारतें हैं, एक खुले आसमान के नीचे आबाद है। वे अपने देश को यूरोप अमेरिका जाकर सुरक्षित कर रहे हैं। हमें तो यहीं रहकर अपने घर को निरापद बनाना है। वे बने बनाए देश को हड़प लेते हैं। हमें तो निरंतर अपने देश को रचना पड़ता है। धन्यवाद।
बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद।
थैंक यू।
बहुत खूब। हाँ, देशों में ही कई देश बसे रहते हैं और विदेश में भी अपना देश रहता है कभी कभी।
जी जी जी।
बहुत सही कहा आपने। जमाल भाई,
Now,
আবার বাংলায় যাই।
in Bengali, in Bengali, I am just jumping the serial, alphabetic serial. I am asking Soumit Basu. Is he here? Soumit?
আছি জামাল দা।
Soumit Basu will now be reciting his poems. Regarding Soumit, he is a very prolific writer. I mean, a poet who writes in almost all the magazines in Bengali. So far, he has 24 collections of Bengali Bangla poems, and his a few of them are বিষণ্ণতর শব্দের দিনগুলি, কথা, আরশি মাছের চোখ, কৃষ্ণ কথা. He has got a lot of prizes like কবিপত্র সম্মাননা, বনানী পুরস্কার, দীনেশ দাস স্মৃতি পুরস্কার, শামসুল হক স্মৃতি পুরস্কার, বাংলাদেশের অরণি পুরস্কার, etc. And he has been associated with many Bengali little magazines. So I would ask Soumit Basu to read his poems.
নমস্কার, সকলকে শুভেচ্ছা। আজকের সঞ্চালক জামালদাকে শ্রদ্ধা জানাচ্ছি। স্বাধীনতা বললে আমার মনে পড়ে যে মানুষের নিজস্ব স্বাধীনতার কথা। মাধুকরী, সব ছেড়ে যদি চলে যেতে চাই তোমার সঙ্গে, পাখিটির সঙ্গে, সরু সরু নদীগুলো পেরিয়ে যদি চলে যাই বাবলা গাছের ধনচে গাছের জঙ্গল পেরিয়ে, এক মাথা রোদ্দুরের ভেতর পা ফেলে, সংসারের ফাঁক ফোঁকর গোলে, শুধু তোমার মলিন শীর্ণ হাতখানি ধরে একবার নয় চিরদিনের মতো যদি চলে যেতে চাই, পায়ে মাড়ানো দুঃখী সন্ধেগুলোর মতো সকলকে ফেলে। তুমি কি পারবে তোমার প্রেমিককে ফেলে, ছাতের আলসেতে লাগানো জবা গাছ ফেলে, প্রতি রবিবার ভিক্ষে চাইতে আসা মেয়েটিকে ফেলে, অজস্র রঙিন দুপুর যেভাবে তোমরা ফুলে ফুলে সাজিয়ে তুলেছ এতকাল, সেই সব ফেলে এক নড়বড়ে সাঁকোর সাথে যদি নরক পর্যন্ত হেঁটে যাওয়ার সাহস থাকে, তবে পত্রপাঠ জানিও, আমি কিন্তু বেরিয়ে পড়েছি। পরম্পরা, আমাদের জাতীয় সঙ্গীত জনগণমন, অথচ অর্ধেক ছেলেপুলে তা গাইতেই পারে না। যমুনা গঙ্গার জায়গায় যমুনার গঙ্গা তো বলবেই, আর জলধি তরঙ্গের জায়গায় যে কি বলতে কি বলে, দিদিমণি গানটা কি ওদের একটু ভালো করে শেখানো চলে না? শেখানো হরেক রকম। মা যেমন শিখিয়েছিল পরীক্ষার খাতা থেকে চোখ না উঠাতে, যারা তা শোনেনি তারা প্রায় সকলেই পার্টির কল্যাণে সরকারি অফিসের ফাঁকে ক্যারামের বোর্ডে। বাবার শেখানো বলি, দশচক্রে ভগবান ভূত, তুমি তা হবে না কখনো। বাবা, ভূত কি আমাকে দানবরা প্রমাণ করেছে। স্ত্রী হয়ে কানের কাছে শীত গ্রীষ্ম বর্ষা ঝামেলায় যেও না কো। ঝামেলা চাইনি বলে মাসে মাসে টাকা কাটে পাড়ার দাদারা। ছেলে মেয়ে কতবার শিখিয়েছে, কতবার আধুনিক হতে, যখন যেমন বুঝে স্রোত দেখে চিনে নিতে হয়। এটুকু বোঝো না দিদিমণি? হয়তো বছর কয়েক পর গোলমাল হয়ে যাবে সব, তবুও ঘরের ছেলে জলধি তরঙ্গের স্রোত না শিখুক, যমুনাটুকুও শিখবে না। শেষ কবিতা রানু ইউসুফজাই। রানু ঠিক কিভাবে মারা গিয়েছিল আমরা কেউই তা জানি না। কেউ বলে গলায় তার পেঁচিয়ে, কেউ বলে ভাঙা বোতল। তবে অধিকাংশই মেনে নিয়েছেন যে শ্বাসরোধ করে অনেক অনেক কিছুর পরে। মৃত্যুর আগের মুহূর্তে রানু ঠিক কি ভেবেছিল আমরা তাও জানি না। আমরা জানি সে ভ্যানচালক তপনের মেয়ে এবং বছর 16 স্কুল ছাত্রী। আর গোপনে জেনেছি তৃতীয়বার ধর্ষিতা হবার আগে সে রুখে দাঁড়িয়েছিল, ঠিক যেভাবে মালালা ইউসুফজাই তালিবান ফতোয়ার বিরুদ্ধে। তফাতেই মালালা প্রাণে বেঁচেছে, আর বেঁচেছে বলেই গলায় নোবেল। আর আমাদের রানু গলায় জড়িয়ে তার শুয়ে থাকে, শুধু শুয়ে থাকে। আর সেই চোখ কোনো দিন খুলবে না জেনে ভোর রাতে তাকে আমরা পুড়িয়ে ফিরেছি। নিঃশব্দে এসেছিল রানু, অনেক শব্দ নিয়ে ঢুকে গেল চিতার ভেতর। এখন কাকদ্বীপ বেশ শান্ত শান্ত পথঘাট। ছমছম ভয় নিয়ে মেয়ের মায়েরা, নিন্দুকেরা সভা করে, কামদুনি বারাসাত স্মরণ করায়। ভেসে আসে তাপসী মালিক, মেঘের ভেতর দিয়ে উড়ে যেতে যেতে রানুও কেমন যেন লজ্জা পেয়ে যায়। ধন্যবাদ।
খুব ভালো কবিতা পড়েছে সৌমিত। এবারে আমরা ইংলিশে যাব আবার।
হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ, আবার একটা ইংলিশে যাই, কিংবা আরেকটা বাংলাও হতে পারে, কারণ বাংলা কবিতা পড়ার লোকেদের সংখ্যা বেশি।
আচ্ছা আচ্ছা, so in that case we can ask
Gautam Dasgupta.
Gautam Dasgupta. Gautam is from Delhi. He stays in Delhi for so many decades. He has served in Election Commission of India in New Delhi. But he's a well-known poet, especially in Delhi. And I knew his name in early 70s when they started a movement, in fact, through a magazine which is called Zero Hour. He was one of the editors of Zero Hour. He has 6 books of poems to his credit, and his latest publication is his Kobita Samagro. Gautam participated in many literary festivals and poetry reading sessions, especially arranged by Sahitya Academy in Kolkata, Delhi, and Sikkim. So now over to Gautam Dasgupta.
আমি অসীম কৃতজ্ঞ যে আমায় রমন সাহেব, জামাল সাহেব আমাকে আজকে এই বিরাট দিগন্তের মধ্যে এনেছেন। সমস্ত সেলিব্রিটির সঙ্গে বসে আছি।
আমি নই, সৃজন এনেছে।
সৃজন, সৃজন কি ব্যাপার সত্যি। তা ব্যাপারটা হচ্ছে যে সবই তো মুক্তি, স্বাধীনতা মানে মুক্তির কবিতা। তা আমি ওইভাবে একটি কবিতা পড়ছি। কবিতার নাম কলম খুঁজবেন না। আমার হৃদয় হিন্দু, ফুসফুস মুসলমান। আমার ভালো লাগা মেয়েটির নাম পৃথিবী। বিপদ জ্যোৎস্নায় তাকে 11 বার বর্ষণ করলো সন্ত্রাস। আমি এখন কোন নির্ভয়কে নিয়ে ভর করব? আর গৈরিকের ডিএনএ করার ডাক্তার পাগল হয়ে এই সেদিন মরল লুম্বিনীর দঙ্গলে। এখন পরিযায়ী পাখির ঘর শনাক্তকরণ করবে এক ভাগ স্থলের কোন বামুন। আঘাত প্রত্যাঘাতে যদুবংশ ধ্বংসের অবস্থা। আমরা ডাল বেশি ফুটিয়ে ফেলছি না তো? আজ পেট্রোল বলছেন, কাল ডিজেল বলবেন। জ্বালানি কিন্তু জ্বালানি, দেখবেন সবকিছু জ্বলে উঠলে আর কলম খুঁজবেন না। আমার পরের কবিতা দেশ তুমি কার। কচুর মতো মাটি খুঁড়ে সব বের করে আনে শিয়াল। অলিন্দে অগরু জ্বালিয়ে বিনা বাজায় রাজা। গঙ্গা ট্রিটমেন্ট প্ল্যান্টের কাগজ ঢাকা সব বয়ে যায় কচুরিপানার সাথে। লিউটেনের প্রাকার ধুলো হয়ে যায় রাজা প্রশান্ত বদন। অক্সিজেনহীনতায় ছটফটে মৃত্যু দেখতে দেখতে, পশুদের নিঃস্বতায় পর্যুদস্ত গরিব দেখতে দেখতে রাজা পোশাক আর প্রাসাদ পাল্টান। এটাই তার কাছে বাতাসের মতন জরুরি। অমেয় অক্সিজেন টিকায় বোকা ও ছন্ন ছাড়া মরে। রাজা ধরে রাগ মন কি বাত। নমস্কার।
অনেক ধন্যবাদ গৌতমকে। গৌতম দাশগুপ্ত এতক্ষণ কবিতা পড়লেন। Now again over to English, I think.
Yes, I think that would be
Yeah.
logical.
Yeah.
So maybe now move on to Mumbai to Bina, Sarkar, Ellias. Is Bina ji here?
Yes, I'm here.
Good. Wonderful. So we can see you, we can hear you. So Bina Sarkar Elias is a poet. She's a founder, editor, designer, and publisher of International Gallery, the Global Arts and Ideas Journal, since the year 1997. Her second book of poems, Hughes, has been taught at Townsend University in the USA, and her sixth book, Song of a Rebel, has recently been released. Her other books include The Room, Hughes, When Seeing is Believing, and Song of a Rebel, etc. Amongst other awards, she has received the Times Group Yami Women Achievers Award in 2008 and the Fiki FLO Award for Excellence in her work in 2013. So it's over to you, Bina Sarkar Elias.
অনেক অনেক ধন্যবাদ Srijan and Boshantu and Raju and everybody out there. So I'll just read straight away a poem I wrote in 2008 on Afghanistan, on Kabul, because of what is happening today in Afghanistan. And in a way, it talks of freedom that they do not have. Kabul. Houses on a hill grow from mud in its womb, up and up, a stairway to despair, ravaged and ravaged again and again by the history of greed. Its inhabitants have faces sculpted from war and medieval stone, as strong, as stoic, as wind-weathered rock along the Salong Pass. Prayers rent the Ramadan air, yet God does not hear. Doomed, they live half-lives exiled in their own land. Streets weary with rubble speak with the tongue of dust and naked bricks. And behind razor wires and stern walls, life ticks to slow pulse beats. Grandparents die, children are born, and sometimes there is wine and song. Thank you. Is there time to
Wonderful.
make another one?
Yes, if it's a short one, you could go ahead with another one too.
Okay, I will read. It's Ode to Utopia. And the sky was washed clean, sparkling like a new minted coin. It was as if it believed in hope, as if the dark clouds were in exile, banished forever. It was as if the storm had taken a sabbatical and become a monk in the mountains. As if politicians had surrendered to compassion. It was as if they had drunk from the sea of Soma and become slaves of peace. As if their corrupt skins had peeled off their scheming minds and flown away. As if all walls and boundaries had blurred into one language, love. As if the tree of life was luminous, with fruit of all colors and creeds, communing in harmony. It was as if Rag Bhairav was in dialogue with Mozart's Nocturne, and a shamisen strummed to the tinkle of the African kalimba. It was as if the spring of freedom had migrated into our lives for permanent residency. And then I woke up, and then I swept away the mist from my eyes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That was wonderful. Great. And it was a kind of foresight, the poem that you wrote in 2008, you said?
Yes, I was in Kabul at that time. I was there just 3 weeks after the Indian embassy was bombed.
Mm-hmm.
And it was one of the most emotional experiences in my life.
Mm-hmm.
Being there, I spent a whole month in Kabul.
Right. So, Jamal bhai,
can we fit in the single Gujarati poet?
Yes, of course, of course.
Dinesh Vadera?
Yeah, of course. Why not?
दिनेश हमारे यहाँ कविताएं गुजराती में भी सुनाए हैं, हिंदी में तो कई बार सुनाए हैं. आज इन्होंने कहा कि गुजराती में इन्होंने बड़ी अच्छी कविता लिख रखी है. Born in 1960, writing since his teens, is recited for us a number of times. And what we remember fondly also is that he has trained us to dance Garba and to dance Dandiya on many occasions. And he has made our rooftop and the place we have all our events into one huge celebration. He is a regular columnist writing in various magazines. He is also presided and is a key speaker and judge at events across the country. He's written about 28 well-received plays, and that is what is his forte, and has directed 99 of them. Also, he's directed 7 short films and acted in plays and films like Maya by Satyajit Ray and Ehsaas by Biplab Goswami, etc. And he's also the founder of Mudra Arts and conducts theatre workshops for school children.
Basak, just a small correction. Maya is not directed by Satyajit Ray, but the Satyajit Ray Film and Television Institute.
Yeah, okay.
Exactly. Film of the SRFTI. Absolutely. And of course, we look forward to your 100th direction and plays also very soon. After 99, the 100th has to come. So go ahead, sir.
I'm 1999 के चक्कर में फंसे है कोरोना में.
हाँ.
बस
वो खासकर
पहले 2 लाइन है.
खासकर इंडियन बैट्समैन का भी वही हाल होता है. 99 में अटक
होता है. पर अब क्या यहाँ तो कोरोना अटका हुआ है. मेरे बैट तैयार है. फील्ड में भी उतरने को तैयार हूँ.
ओके.
मैं पहले छोटी सी एक 2 लाइन की बात, फिर कविता. सभी को ये स्वतंत्रता दिवस जो 15 अगस्त को हमने मनाया, बधाइयां देता हूं, भरपूर बधाइयां देता हूं और जीवन सबका सुरक्षित रहे ऐसी कामना करता हूं. इस स्वतंत्र शब्द की बात है. स्वतंत्र स्व की बात करते, स्वतंत्र में स्व और तंत्र की बात करते, तब तंत्र भूल जाते हैं और अधिकार की बात करते हैं। और जब वाइस वर्सा, जब हम तंत्र की बात करते हैं तो सिर्फ कर्तव्य की बात भूल जाते हैं। तो हमको अधिकार चाहिए पर कर्तव्य को हम भूल जाते हैं। इसी बाबत को लक्ष्य में रखकर गुजराती में जो कविता है, शहीदों ने वंदन। લ્યો આજે ફરી એકવાર તક મળી આપણા મહાન नेताओं शहीदों नामे अश्रु वहवड़ावानी। रोने के लिए फिर मिल गया एक शहीद का शहीद होना। हद થઈ ગઈ આ તો, પણ હદ તો ત્યારે વટાएगी જ્યારે આદેશ જારી થવા લાગે। સરહદ ઉપર સૈનિકો શહીદ થયા, વહેવડાવો આશુ, ચાલો ખરીદો તાબૂત। અરે માત્ર 60 જ, ઓનલી 60, નહીં કમ। અરે તાબૂત પર તિરંગા જરૂર લગાવજો। સંસદ ઉપર હુમલો થયો, વહેવડાવો આશુ, ચાલો સૌને બુલેટ પ્રૂફ જેકેટ લઈ દો। અને જે પૈસા લાગે અને જે વધે જુઓ, એ શહીદની ચિતાઓ પર મેળાઓ લગાડો અને વહેવડાવજો થોડા આંસુ પર। અને એ આંસુ પોછવા સફેદ નવા રૂમાલ પણ ખરીદજો। હા, ત્યાર પછી એક શાનદાર શોક સભાનું આયોજન પણ કરજો। ભવ્ય સભાગૃહમાં તાજા તાજા ફૂલો મંગાવજો, સારી મહેક આવશે, रड़नाराओं सुगमता रहसे। रोने वालों को थोड़ा इजी रहेगा, अच्छे अच्छे फूल होंगे, नई खुशबू आएगी। अरे आ सांभळीने पेली बेन केम रड़वा लागी? मात्र अश्रु वहेवड़ावाथी कहीं न वळे मारा भाईओ बहनों, शिराओथी रक्त टपके छे, हृदय वलोवाय छे। आવું चेटक क्या लगी? आज एक प्रार्थना करवी छे। आज मारा आ शहीदों पर एक एहसान करजो। जो मान ना दई શકો તો એમનો અપમાન તો ના કરશો, એક ચેતવણી પણ છે। જો આ શહીદોના બાળકો ભૂખ પ્યાસથી તડફડતા હશે, એમની વૃદ્ધ માતાના આંચલ આંસુઓથી તર થશે, એ શહીદોની વિધવાઓ દર દર ભટકશે, તો જાણી લેજો દેશની સીમાઓ પર સૈનિકો માટે તરસશે। ત્યારે હું અને તમે ક્યાં હશું? પેલા બુલેટ પ્રૂફ જેકેટ ખરીદવામાં, तिरंगाओ खरीदवामां? जो जो पहला आंसू पोछवा खरीदेला नवा सफेद रुमाल आपणा माटे पण खरीदवा पड़शे एकवार, पण पछी तेने वापरवा माटे कोई पण स्वतंत्र व्यक्ति देशवासी हाजर हशे ते केम एक सवाल छे। चाल अत्यारे तो ए शहीदोने वंदन करिए। वंदे मातरम। सिर्फ शहीद लोगों के जाने के बाद जो नेता तंत्र या देशवासी जो अपने को कहलाना चाहते हैं, उनकी ये बातें हमें व्यथित करती है। इसी पर ये कविता है। धन्यवाद।
वेरी गुड।
তো এবার আবার বাংলায় ফিরে আসি।
हाँ, ओके। Pranji Basak. Pranji Basak also stays in Delhi. Though he was born in North Bengal, he has been residing in Delhi for the last 40 years. As a poet, he has been writing in almost all the Bengali magazines all over the country. He has more than 20 books to his credit. His book of poems are Eka Eka Ekaki, Dekhi Ek Onno Manush, Jol Chobi, Nabhimule, etc. He writes short stories also. He is the recipient of Ruporshi Bangla Award, Banani Purashkar, Saraswati Samman, etc. Now over to Pranji Basak.
আমার প্রথম কবিতা শিরোনাম ঘটে যেতে পারে। যা হবার নয় তা হয়ে যেতে পারে, যা ঘটার নয় তা ঘটে যেতে পারে। এমন সংবাদ রটালো যে শ্রমিক তার ঘরে কেউ নেই, আছে শুধু একটি শুকনো গাছ। তাতে কি, এবার ফল হবে নিশ্চয়। ফলে থাকে বীজ, বীজ থেকে আরেকটি গাছ এবং হাওয়া। হাওয়ায় উড়বে কচি পাতাদের কান্না আর মাটির গন্ধ। রাতের উঠোনে শুকনো গাছ মৃদু স্বরে আগুনের কথা শোনায়। শরীরময় আগুন বিনিময় হতে থাকে সময়। দূর থেকে কেউ শীষ দেয় নিশুতি রাতে, রাত জাগা চোখে বিহ্বলতা, যা ঘটার তা ঘটে। আমার দ্বিতীয় কবিতা সকাল সকাল। আয়নার পেছনে লেপ্টে থাকে একটা চিকন সকালবেলা। ধুরন্ধর কাকেরাও জানে সে কথা, ওরা দল বেঁধে ওড়ে, কার্নিশে লাফায়। ততক্ষণে আমাদের পলেস্তারা খসে পড়ে, মুখ তুলে আসমানে খুঁজি বিশ্ব মঞ্চ। পায়ে পায়ে বিষক্রিয়া, রোদ ওঠে পারাময়, কারো মুখে রা নেই, ভুলে গেছে মুখের ভাষা। কেউ এসে থমকে দাঁড়ায়, উল্টো পিঠে ভঙ্গুর আয়না। সমবেত জনতা সমস্বরে জিগির তোলে বন্দে। কাকেদের জটলা সমস্বরে বলে ক্যাঁ ক্যাঁ। আমি খুঁজি মহান মহাদেশ আয়নার এ পিঠে ও পিঠে। ধন্যবাদ।
ধন্যবাদ প্রাণজি বসাককে।
Okay, so then we move over to Rajoshik Mitro. And Rajoshik, based out of Calcutta, his poems have appeared in Indian literature, the Bombay Review, and other print and online magazines. His first book of poems, God is Bipolar, Type 2, was released this year. Besides writing, Rajoshik enjoys making music, dabbles in digital art, and works full time at the UI UX design lead for a tech company. So over to Rajoshik to read his poem.
Thanks, Srijan, for this opportunity. I'll get straight to my poems. My first poem is.
Would you like to put your video on, Rajoshik?
I'm sorry, actually, my webcam's out of order. So.
Okay, yeah, okay.
My first poem is called His Violence. I bore inside me in search of inner resources, or to debug Friday evening, my veins loaded with the darkness of back cat scratch alleys and the possibility of rain, red, slip past security cams, GST robots with fissile human souls, giant arachnid arms, and cried on an empty roof with the acid rain, large sky torn by jets, and man-made comets of death. My mother shakes in my arms, trying to name the flag on AVs whizzing by. I try to run out of range. I try to miss the bomb by a hair. It was only a nightmare. I wake up and cuff tar as black as time. In the news, Iraqis and Afghans are dying. I wait for the explosion in my sky. I wait to see the face of God imploding in on itself from shame. So I'll move on to my next poem. This one is called Football with the British. Thought I'd go a bit contextual. Okay. Somewhere now, my grandpa is playing football with the British. They don't have spiked boots, my grandpa doesn't. And those who do dig them into his flesh. He doesn't wince, but he could never play football again. Years later, my mother is crying. He is motionless on a white bed, wrapped in flowers and plastic at the curb outside his own doorstep. Okay, my last poem. To my cursed land. Circled round and eaten by vultures, land painted by tar, stuck in misery, boundless to the horizon, death door to door, violence coast to coast, wind of amnesia, Kashmir to Kumari, Gujarat to Assam, the great terrible mother, the shadow in my dreams, skyfall and clogged drains of August roughly put together. We are not murderers. They came in with guns, we loaded trains with sacks, and sacks with body parts, tiny arms and tiny feet, the legs of a woman, the heads of old men. which set fire to each compartment. We are paper, and we've been cast to the flames. We're burning widows on the pyre. Give us a chance again. The most primitive dance of destruction, the most primitive politesse, the most primitive insecurities, but we have been preyed upon. Please, Brahma's head and feet shouldn't meet. We have been treated so bad, treated like dogs and cane minstrels and bards that we bred. Go on, sing out loud. Sing out loud about Hindustan. Sing out the terror of the untouchable. Sing out the rapes. Sing out with swords and keep repeating. We are not murderers. They came at us with guns. We are lotus at the goddess's dead feet. We are veggies growing on thapa, fed on burning, forgotten identities. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I find a comment. I find a comment from Julie Mehta. She writes about Rajasic poems. Rajasic, such vivid imagery, your signature style. Loved your reading. Awesome progress. Look forward to more.
Also, Rajashik's last poem about We Are Not Murderers reminds me of an excellent film of the silent era, which was called The Murderers Are Amongst Us. You know, it's a great film which said the murderers are amongst us, you know. Okay. So if you get a chance, you should look that film up in YouTube.
Yes.
Right. We can move on to Pawan Maskaraji. Pawanji, are you here?
Yes, he is very much here. They would know Pawan as a craftsman with his words. We don't have our very, very senior poet who has left us, Naval. But whenever we spoke of poetry in Calcutta, Hindi poetry in Calcutta, Naval put his finger on Pawan and said, there is no one other than him who is as beautiful. He is a very, very beloved poet and also a member of our poetry team, right since when Srijan was born, from about 2000. That's also, incidentally, I would like this opportunity to thank Bodhayan, who is here. And Bodhayan was also from day one. As a matter of fact, I think he was before day one. Born in 1950 in Kolkata, Pawan graduated from St. Xavier's. And then, like Dinesh is very close to drama and theatre, Pawan too graduated from National School of Drama in Delhi, specializes in direction, and has directed many plays very well received, and also has adapted a number of renowned playwrights. We were talking about plays, and here with us is also a very important person in the theatre world, and he is Vinay Sharma, and he would remember the plays by both Dinesh as well as Pawan. Pawan started composing poetry when he was in his teens, and he writes both in Hindi as well as in Urdu. And as I said, his rhyme, meter, and his words are a pleasure to hear. Pawan, over to you.
तो मैं शुरू कर रहा हूँ. एक कविता है, उसका शीर्षक है शरणार्थी. हो चुका गहन मंथन चिंतन सब कालबद्ध अध्यायों का. हो चुका गहन मंथन चिंतन सब कालबद्ध अध्यायों का. अब न्याय करेगा कौन यहाँ इतिहास जन्य अन्यायों का.
क्या बात है, बहुत सुंदर.
इहलोक नहीं मेरा अपना परलोक प्रदेश परायों का. इहलोक नहीं मेरा अपना परलोक प्रदेश परायों का. दंडित के पुरस्कृत या के बहिष्कृत सभ्य असभ्य निकायों का. नेपथ्य भाग में छाए हैं बारूद भरे काले बादल. नेपथ्य भाग में छाए हैं बारूद भरे काले बादल. यह विश्व बना है रंगमंच आतंकवाद के जायों का। युग मानव ने, युग दानव ने जिसकी धज्जी धज्जी कर दी।
बहुत सुंदर,
युग
बहुत
मानव
सुंदर।
ने, युग दानव ने जिसकी धज्जी धज्जी कर दी। था सर्वशक्ति संपन्न किंतु वह ईश्वर था निरुपायों का। मुट्ठी भर, चुटकी भर, अणु भर यदि कोई संबल मिल जाता। मुट्ठी भर, चुटकी भर, अणु भर यदि कोई संबल मिल जाता। मैं लुप्त प्राय अन्वेषी हूं कुछ लुप्त प्राय अभिप्रायों का। मैं ढूंढ रहा आकार अपना, मैं ढूंढ रहा काया अपनी। मैं ढूंढ रहा आकार अपना, मैं ढूंढ रहा काया अपनी। या देश मेरा लघु कायों का, या देश मेरा अति कायों का। मैं ढूंढ रहा आकार अपना, मैं ढूंढ रहा काया अपनी। या देश मेरा अति कायों का, या देश मेरा लघु कायों का। धन्यवाद। एक और छोटी कविता ले है। इसका शीर्षक है राजनीति। मनन करो पवित्र का, हनन करो चरित्र का। ये चित्र है विचित्र का, न शत्रु का न मित्र का। मनन करो पवित्र का, हनन करो चरित्र का। ये चित्र है विचित्र का, न शत्रु का न मित्र का। विदेह अंकशायिनी अजस्र शक्तिदायिनी। राजनीति की बात हो रही है। विदेह अंकशायिनी अजस्र शक्तिदायिनी। छिनाल पतिपरायणी निकृष्ट की सहायिनी। कलंक यह, प्रशस्ति यह, अनीति यह, कुरीति यह। अधर्म की प्रतीति यह, स्वधर्म राजनीति यह।
वाह 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 वाह, बहुत खूब, बहुत खूब।
थैंक यू।
इसमें इस तरह से आपने अनुप्रास भी लाया है।
हाँ,
बहुत सुंदर तरह से
अलंकार तो
अनुप्रास
कई,
लाया है,
अलंकार
है।
तो कई सारे इसमें
बहुत
विरोधी है मैंने।
बहुत खूब,
धन्यवाद।
জামাল ভাই বাংলাতে বাংলা
রিমির নাম আছে? রিমি আছে?
হ্যাঁ আছে, এসে গেছি।
Okay. So Rimi is here. She's a known poet. She started writing in 90s. She lives in Siliguri. She has several books of poems like Linotap, Rabon, Kalo Bedal, Bonobhojon, etc. Among the awards, she is the recipient of Kobita Pakkik Samman, Ethos Literary Award, Notun Shotok Samman, etc. She edits a very fine magazine for poetry that is called Poddo. And now she will be reading poems for us. Over to Rimi.
গুড ইভিনিং এভরিবডি। খুব ভালো সময় কাটছে সন্ধে থেকে। এত ভাষার দারুণ সমাহারে রয়েছি কবিতার সাথে, খুব ভালো লাগছে। আমার কবিতা পড়ছি, বাংলা কবিতা। কবিতা মানেই তো মুক্তি, এক মুক্তির আনন্দ। সেই কবিতা মানেই স্বাধীনতা। মুক্তি ছাড়া তো কবিতা নেই, কবিতাতেই মুক্তি। তো পড়ছি মুক্তির কবিতা। ছোট ছোট তিনটে পড়ছি। গতকাল বিকেল থেকে কালোর উপর রিভার্সে লেখা একটি পোস্ট। কবি রিমি দে আর নেই, ঘুরছে সোশ্যাল মিডিয়ায়। এই খবরটা আমাকে দেয় কবি গালিব নামে একজন। কবি গালিব আমার দীর্ঘদিনের বন্ধু। আগে ছিল কলম বন্ধু, কয়েক বছর হলো ফেসবুক বন্ধু। এই নামেই সে নানান কাগজে লেখে। ও ছেলে না মেয়ে আমি ঠিক জানি না, প্রথম থেকেই আড়ালে রেখেছে নিজেকে। আমিও ওর সুরে সুর মিলিয়েছি, ভোরে ভৈরব, রাতে দেশরাগ, অনুরাগে তাল কেটে কখনো খেয়ে ফেলেছি দুপুরের গাঢ় লাল। তেলে হাত পিছলে গেলেই ও মাখিয়ে দিত হলুদ, দূরের সুর মুক্তির। আমার এই মৃত্যুর খবরটা আমি জানতাম না, অথচ ও জানতো। আমি এমন একটি খবরের জন্য বসে আছি বহুকাল। 2, ঢেউ কিনবার জন্য রক্ষক হবার প্রয়োজন পড়ে না। আসছি আসবো করতে করতে ফুল ও গান বাজার, জল ঘাঁটতে ঘাঁটতে হাজা হয়ে যাবার পরও ফুটে ওঠা ভাতের গন্ধে রাতভর ছায়া ছায়া খেলা, ভোরের প্রথম কল্পনার শরীরে আলপনার ফুলছাপ, লাল গেরুয়ার বৈরাগ্য। এই দেখো বাঁধনের গায়ে কি অপরূপ মুক্তির হাওয়া। শেষ কবিতা। ফুল প্যাকেজ, একদম পারফেক্ট। আমার মতোই পার্টিবাজ, উইকেন্ডে গ্লাস ভর্তি ফুলঝুরি, ডিনারে রক্তিম আবেশ, ফাটাফাটি জাস্ট বেবি। 2 দিন পর ফিরে এসে ঈশা বলল, আরো বলল, বাট সারা জীবন একজন? আমি বিয়ে মেটেরিয়াল নই সম্ভবত। মা সামান্য বিরতির পর বলেন, আমি ফ্লাইটের টিকিট কেটে দিচ্ছি, 2 দিন অফিস ছুটি নিয়ে একা সমুদ্রে বেরিয়ে এসো। ঠিক বলেছ মা, আমার আরো সময় চাই। ধন্যবাদ।
ধন্যবাদ রিমি দেখে। এবারে তাহলে আমার মনে হয় বাকি
এবার আরেকটা বাংলা হয়ে যাক,
আরেকটা বাংলা হয়ে ওকে ওকে দেন we have Sabari Rai. Sabari was born and brought up in Jalpaiguri, but she has been living in major cities like Kolkata, Mumbai, Delhi, and now she resides in Gurgaon. She is a prolific writer. She not only writes poetry but also short stories, essays, newspaper features, etc. Her collection of poems include Hijol Gachet Bonsai, Buddho Shunno. She has 2 collections of short stories. Excuse me. She is the recipient of Divaratrir Kabbo Samman. She was one associated with the Bangla magazine published from Mumbai titled Lona Hawa. She is also a singer who specialized in Rabindra Sangeet. Now over to Sabari.
A great experience, really. And thank you, Srijan. সবাইকে শ্রদ্ধা জানাই। আর আমার কাছে খুব একটা বই কিচ্ছু নেই, তো আমি সদ্য লেখা 2টো পড়ব, ছোট্ট ছোট। শিল্প গড়তে গেলেই ভাত উঠলে ভেসে যায় রান্নাঘর, ভিক্ষুক চাঁদ চেটে পুটে খেয়ে যায় ভাতের ফ্যান। গাছের পরিচর্যা করতে গেলেই উথলে ওঠে ভাত, ফুটফুটিয়ে কাঁদতে থাকে গভীর জ্বালায়। 2 কলম লিখতে গেলেই উথলে যায় ভাত, পুড়ে যায় হাত শোকে। মেয়ে মানুষ কেবল সরু মোটা চালের উথলে যাওয়া ভাতের গন্ধ। আর একটা আমি আজ সন্ধ্যে 6টাতেই লিখেছি, তো সেজন্য সবাইকে প্রথম পড়ে শোনাচ্ছি। প্রথমে সংবহন তন্ত্র। শেকল আমার পায়জোর, হৃৎপিণ্ডের রিংরাং শব্দ। ওই জীবন্ত কুঠরিতে বাস করে স্বাধীনতা। একবার বিশুদ্ধ হয়ে ছড়িয়ে পড়ে, পর মুহূর্তেই অশুদ্ধ হয়ে ফিরে আসে। শিরা উপশিরা নিয়ে আসে পরাধীন শব্দ। কোটরে বিশুদ্ধ হয়ে ছড়িয়ে পড়ে স্বাধীন নাম। আমার ঘুমটা উড়ে যায়, কাঁচুলি ছুঁড়ে ফেলি, চোখের মনি ভুলে যায় গোলাপি রং। পরাধীন পৃথিবী আমাকে দেখে, আমি দেখি তাকে। এ এক আশ্চর্য সংবহন তন্ত্র, শুদ্ধ অশুদ্ধ, স্বাধীন পরাধীন, রক্তে ঝিনঝিন শব্দ। এই প্রক্রিয়ার শেষ হয় না কখনো। নমস্কার।
থ্যাংক ইউ।
অনেক ধন্যবাদ, সবারকে ধন্যবাদ।
শেষ কবিতাটা অন্তত মনে হলো ফ্রেশ ফ্রম দি ওভেন, যেটা বলে।
একদম সন্ধ্যে 6টার সময় লিখেছি, সন্ধ্যে 6টায় লিখলাম।
কাজে আমি যখন নামের তালিকায় লিখছিলাম তখন সবারিরা ওখানে দেখতে পারলাম না, তখন বোধহয় কবিতাটা লিখছিলেন।
ঠিক আছে, ধন্যবাদ সবাইকে।
আচ্ছা জামাল ভাই, এইবার রাজ্যবর্ধনের কাছে যায় হিন্দিতে। রাজ্যবর্ধন জি তো আছেন, আমি যতদূর দেখলাম।
Yes, he is there. Yes.
वो हैं यहाँ पर।
Very much. राजवर्धन जी भी आपको बहुत बहुत स्वागत। हमारा सृजन में आपका, आप हम सब जानते हैं, लिटरेचर जर्नलिस्ट, and his poetry is regularly published in all over the country. And he's also the art critic of Kolkata's newspapers like Jansatta for over 2 decades, and even of an important newspaper like Now Bharat Times coming out from Patna. And he's been on editorial board of various magazines, and he received a number of awards also. आप अपना आज भी 3 मिनट आपके सामने है, स्वाधीनता। थैंक यू।
धन्यवाद सृजन, बसंत जी को भी, और प्रियंकर पालीवाल जी शायद आज नहीं है, प्रियंकर पालीवाल जी को भी जो मौका दिया आज स्वाधीनता अमृत महोत्सव के अवसर पर कविताओं का पाठ के लिए। एक छोटी कविता, फिर एक बड़ी नहीं, मैंने 3 मिनट के अंदर खत्म हो जाएगी। यहां से एक सड़क पत्थर की उस गोल हवेली तक जाती है जहां सफेद बगुले मछली की विकास की परियोजना बनाते हैं। अब आ रहा हूं मैं मेन कविता पर। शीर्षक है 16 अगस्त के बिहान। मॉर्निंग। आज 16 अगस्त के बिहान सोच रहा हूं 16 अगस्त 1947 के बारे में। उस दिन जब हिंदुस्तान सुबह जगा होगा तो कैसा महसूस कर रहा होगा? ऊर्जा से उल्लसित या दंगों में झुलसा उदास? आंखों में झांक रहे होंगे नवनिर्माण के सपने, या डूबी होगी आंसुओं में परिजनों को खोकर विस्थापित शरणार्थी होकर? चेहरे पर होगा सदियों से गुलामी के मुक्ति का एहसास, या तैर रही होगी भविष्य के प्रति गहरी आशंका? असंख्य प्रश्न उठ रहे होंगे लोगों के मन में, असंख्य प्रश्न उठ रहे होंगे लोगों के मन में। समाधान कहां होगा उस समय? समाधान कहां होगा उस समय उन यक्ष प्रश्नों का देश के सामने? बापू भी उस दिन दिल्ली में कहां थे? कोलकाता में थे, सांप्रदायिक दंगे को रोकने की कोशिश में। 1977 का जो मूवमेंट है, दूसरी आजादी के नाम से जाना जाता है। तो मैं वही कह रहा हूं कि पहली आजादी के 74 साल और दूसरी आजादी के 44 साल बीत जाने के बाद भी सारे यक्ष प्रश्न धरे के धरे हैं, जस के तस। पिछले साल ही तो देखा था हमने लाखों करोड़ों प्रवासी मजदूरों को पैदल चलते बदहवास सत्ता की बिसात पर। लाल किला के प्राचीर से देश के तमाम प्रधान हर साल गरीबी, भूखमरी, बेरोजगारी को दूर करने का नारे उछालते रहे। करोड़ों अरबों रुपए के योजनाओं के सब्ज बाग दिखाते रहे। पर यक्ष प्रश्नों के समाधान की तलाश बदस्तूर आज भी जारी है, बदस्तूर आज भी जारी है। आओ आओ हम मिलकर तलाशे उन यक्ष प्रश्नों का सही समाधान। करना है देश का नए सिरे से नवनिर्माण। जय जवान जय किसान। धन्यवाद।
बहुत सुंदर,
बहुत बहुत सुंदर। जय जवान जय किसान के नारे के साथ खत्म किया है आपने। लाल बहादुर शास्त्री जी का कॉइन किया हुआ। এবার একটু বাংলায় চলে যাই। যশোধরা রায়চৌধুরী।
Yashodhara আছে. She is from Kolkata. She has been writing since 1990s. From this book, I find that she has 16 collections of poetry and short stories to her credit. She writes short stories, novels, and critical essays, and articles get published in leading newspapers and magazines all over Bengal. She was awarded the Krittibash Puraskar in 1998, established by Sunil Gangopadhyay, and Anita Sunil Kumar Puraskar instituted by Bangla Academy in 2006. She is also the recipient of Borno Porichoy Sharad Samman 2011. Over and above all this, she is also translated from the original French language into Bengali. She was awarded the Diploma de Langue from Alliance Française du Kolkata in 1998 and has translated Leonardo da Vinci in 2008 and Combat de la Vie by Dr. Luc Montier in 2012. She is married to Trinanjan Chakraborty, a scholar and teacher of the French language. So that's all what is written here in, and moreover, Yashodhara is a familiar name in our Srijan ambience. She has read many times, several times. She has been here, and in fact, Basant was insisting that Yashodhara will be here. Otherwise, there will be no poets in Bangla.
Oh, what?
It is true. It is true, but
Thank you, Jamal.
and I am always amazed that she writes such lovely poetry despite all that she is doing in real life. To talk to her, you have to seek an appointment nearly a month before from her secretary. And that just is like an
You can't say that because she now stays in Bhubaneswar. You can't say that.
No, but I have come back to Kolkata. Thanks to Srijan, thanks to Basantji and Jamalda and Rajuda and all the other poets. I
and
really love
Anonna, because
listening to you.
Anonna actually got in touch with you first.
Yes. And I have been to Srijan's poetry evenings so many times, physically also on the rooftop adda. So actually, I remember the rooftop adda only when I hear Srijan. So I'll read one translation because there are so many poets who may not be familiar with Bangla. So one translation of my poem in Bangla, and then I will read the Bangla, and then another Bangla poem. So this is the English is the viral video. This I'll just contextualize it. This was written after a video went viral about in Jharkhand. One mother, she was disrobed in front of her children. I think few years back, 4-5 years back, and that video became viral. The mother trying to cover herself and the children are watching, something like that. It was a horrible Dalit woman or something. So the viral video. Every time you itch a wound, there is a shooting pain. You require to be that crafty to go near the motherland. With many splendored wounds, each wound we peep through, like a street side bioscope box. Every time we look, there is a risk of getting hurt, becoming blind.
The inside of my motherland, the whitish, pale, uneven road, my motherland's entrails throbbing, ejecting sharpnels, the fear, the shaking pall of gloom and fog, the vibrating country inside. My motherland is like a leather water carrier, water and blood oozing from 1,000 wounds. Every time Mother India gets disrobed, we children get ecstatic, we sob and cheer. So, এবার বাংলাটা পড়ছি। শোনা যাচ্ছে তো আমার গলাটা?
হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ শোনা যাচ্ছে, ভালোভাবেই শোনা যাচ্ছে।
নগ্নতা ভিডিও। বারবার ঘা খুঁচিয়ে তুলে সুখ, কি প্রচন্ড চতুরতা নিয়ে বারবার যাওয়া সচ্ছিদ্র জন্মভূমির কাছে। চোখ ঠেকিয়ে থাকা সেই এক একটা ফুটোয় বায়োস্কোপ বাক্সটার বারবার অন্ধ হতে হতে বেঁচে যাওয়া। ভেতরে অন্ধকার, ঝুল, শ্বেতবর্ণ ফ্যাকাশে রুক্ষ পথ, ভেতরে বিবশ ভয়, কাঁপতে থাকা পাতলা চাদর, কুয়াশার ভেতরে আন্দোলিত দেশ। জন্মভূমি চামড়ার মশক, সহস্র ফুটোর থেকে তীব্র বেগে বের হয়ে আসে রক্ত, আসে উষ্ণ জল। বারবার নগ্ন হয় ভারত জননী, বারবার ছবি দেখে উল্লাসে ফোঁপায় সন্তানেরা। এরপরের কবিতাটি বাংলাতেই শুরু করছি। ফিরে আসা। লেখার কাছে ফিরে আসতে হবে। টুকরো লেখা, আবিল লেখা, মারাত্মক লেখা, ভালোবাসার লেখা। লেখার কাছে জোর করে নিজেকে ফেরাতে হয়। গরুর লেখা, গলির লেখা, মন্দিরের রাস্তার লেখা, ইট পাথরের লেখা, দোকানে সাজানো পসরার লেখা। নিজের কাছে ফিরে আসা যেন। অন্ধকার গেট ক্যাঁচ করে খুলে যায়, ভেতরে রোদ্দুর ঢোকে না। তারপর এক চিলতে একটা উঠোন আর শাঁস বয়ামে তেলে চুবোনো আম। এই ফিরে আসা, এই অন্ধকারের পথ ধরে ধরে আলোর দিকে, মন খারাপের পথ ধরে ধরে আনন্দের দিকে, এখন এখন এখনের পথ ধরে ধরে অতীতের দিকে, সেই অন্তহীন গতকালের দিকে যার ভেতরে পুড়ে রাখা আছে প্রাণ ভোমরার মতো আমাদের মনের সমস্ত উপাদান। কেমিক্যাল ক, কেমিক্যাল খ, মেশালেই ফুস ফুস ধোঁয়া, মেশালেই হই হই আগুন। অথচ অন্য সময় দেখো কেউ নেই, কিছু নেই, ঘুঁ। শুকনো বাজির মশলা, আলাদা আলাদা ব্রাউন পেপারের ঠোঙা ভর্তি করে নিরুদ্বিগ্ন পাশাপাশি রাখা। ধন্যবাদ।
অনেক ধন্যবাদ যশোধরাকে। যশোধরা এতক্ষণ বাংলা এবং একটি অনুবাদও পড়েছেন ইংরেজিতে। এবারে I think we should switch over to the last poet.
That's right, last poet Syed Faruqi.
Syed Faruqi is also a poet who has read for us in Srijan many a time. Actually, you know, he did his MA and his PhD in Urdu at Calcutta University, and his dissertation was on the life and work of Upendranath Ashk. He is one of the famed Urdu writers of the country, who is not only a poet but a lyricist and a journalist who specializes in ghazal and nazm, geet, rubai, katat, etc. He's also a short story writer, as well as he writes in Urdu and Hindi for many international and national magazines and newspapers. Many of his published works are, but Kasak, Platform Ticket are those which we remember fondly. He also forms, his poetry also forms a music album, Shabigam, sung by Adil Bakshi, and he has been extensively awarded. So recently by the most prestigious Uttar Pradesh Urdu Academy. Syed bhai, आपका बहुत बहुत स्वागत।
हाँ, मैं सबसे पहले तो मैं बसंत जी का बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया अदा कर रहा हूँ कि उन्होंने सृजन पोएट्री आने में मुझे दावत बख्शी। आज जश्न आज़ादी के इस हसीन मौके पर एक नज़्म पेश कर रहा हूँ। नज़्म का शीर्षक उन्वान है इस देश की धरती। इस देश की सारी धरती से एक प्यार की खुशबू आती है, परदेश में रहने वालों को भारत की याद सताती है। पहला बंद है, खेतों में किसानों को देखो, खेतों में किसानों को देखो, मेहनत से अनाज वो बोते हैं, गोरों का दिल में खौफ नहीं, और जुल्म से वो नहीं रोते हैं। इस देश में आज़ादी से सब, इस देश में आज़ादी से सब अब चैन से घर में सोते हैं। ये देख के भारत की मिट्टी अब गीत खुशी की गाती है, परदेश में रहने वालों को भारत की याद सताती है। इस मुल्क की खातिर फौजों ने हर जंग में दी है कुर्बानी, वो सच्चे वीर थे भारत के, सुनकर होती है हैरानी। जब याद उन्हें हम करते हैं, आंखों से छलकता है पानी। हर गांव शहर की गलियों में, हर गांव शहर की गलियों में आज़ादी धूम मचाती है, परदेश में रहने वालों को भारत की याद सताती है। आखिरी बात, गंगा जमुना के पानी में आकाश उतर के कहता है, तीर्थ के लिए आते हैं लोग, या पुण्य का दरिया बहता है। मंदिर मस्जिद गुरुद्वारे में, मंदिर मस्जिद गुरुद्वारे में लोगों का जमघट रहता है। इस देश में सारे मजहब की, इस देश में सारे मजहब की दिल से इज्जत की जाती है। इस देश की सारी धरती से एक प्यार की खुशबू आती है, परदेश में रहने वालों को भारत की याद सताती है। दूसरी नज़्म है, बदल रहा है समा, बदल रहा है ज़माना मगर मोहब्बत है, हमारे हिंद की सबसे बड़ी ये दौलत है। यहाँ पे कितने मज़ाहिब के लोग रहते हैं, हमारे देश की सारे जहां में शोहरत है। बंद है, वतन के सारे शहीदों को हो हमारा सलाम, जिन्होंने देश की खातिर किया है ऐसा काम कि अब भी गूंज रहे हैं फजा में उनके नाम। उन ना समझ इसको इंसान एक हकीकत है, यहाँ पे कितने मज़ाहिब के लोग रहते हैं, हमारे देश की सारे जहां में शोहरत है। बंद है, जो आम जनता है जहनों को मोड़ देते हैं, लहू बहाते हैं दहशत से जोड़ देते हैं, फसाद करके वो एकता को तोड़ देते हैं। हमारी धरती को उन मुजरिमों से नफरत है, यहाँ पे कितने मज़ाहिब के लोग रहते हैं, हमारे देश के सारे जहां में शोहरत है। बंद है, चराग प्यार का हर सू जलाओ ऐ लोगो, हर सू से मुराद है हर तरफ, चराग प्यार का हर सू जलाओ ऐ लोगो, वफा के फूल जहां में खिलाओ ऐ लोगो, दिलों से धर्म के झगड़े मिटा दो ऐ लोगो, कि राम ईसा मोहम्मद की ये नसीहत है, हमारे देश की सारे जहां में शोहरत है। आखिरी बंद है, तभी पुकार के कहती है वतन वालों, बदल रहा है समा नींद से जरा जागो, मशीनी दौर है खुद को यहाँ बदल डालो, नए सफर में नई सोच की जरूरत है, बदल रहा है जमाना मगर मोहब्बत है, हमारे हिंद की सबसे बड़ी ये दौलत है, यहाँ पे कितने मज़ाहिब के लोग रहते हैं, हमारे देश की सारे जहां में शोहरत है, हमारे देश की सारे जहां में शोहरत है। शुक्रिया।
बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया। बिल्कुल बिल्कुल
थैंक्स,
शौहरत है हमारे यहाँ के इसमें, बिल्कुल।
बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया।
So I think we have come to the end of this evening of poetry, dedicated specially for this evening and to the theme of freedom and independence. Thank you very much for all your patience. Thank you to Jamal Bhai for conducting this wonderfully, and Basant and all the others of the poetry team for having put this constellation of poets together in so many languages and translations. Great. And for the keynote at the beginning, thank you very much, Professor Sobha Chattopadhyay. And I don't know whether you noticed, but there were a couple of questions for you from Julie, but this is not the platform to answer those questions. Probably you have seen them on the chat box. She had posted a couple of questions for you after your address. Maybe you can have a look at it sometime and talk with her some other time about that. She had said, how do we relocate or reconfigure Mr. Hughes' poetry? Would you say perhaps birthday letters is a necessary collection we must interrogate? And the other one was, I was at a reading in a US university by Ted Hughes, where he was called murderer. This was in the late 80s. If we speak of Ted Hughes' work, we must speak of Sylvia Plath's poetry also. Okay. Basant, would you like to make some concluding statements?
Thank you, Raju. And thank you, Jamal. Any concluding statement of an evening that has been anchored and concluded, and so aptly, can only be a vote of thanks. And that can only be given by Bodhayan, who's been with Srijan from day one. But before doing that, we must also acknowledge the vital contributions made by each one of our coordinators, who are really the souls of Srijan. And we must also mention those who are not here just now. Anjana Basu, our English poetry coordinator, helping us so indispensably, both in our tributes as well as in our invitations. And Debashish Lahiri, who had threaded together our very first virtual poetry meet this June, with poets participating all the way from France, not just reading their poetry, but also paying such beautiful tributes to the French poet Aimé Césaire of that month. And our Hindi coordinator, Priyankar Paliwal, who alone has kept our lamp of Hindi poetry burning, and Zarina Zareen of our Urdu poetry. And then Ononna Banerjee, who had joined us 20 years ago and is even today such a passionate member of our Bengali team. And then Deepak Lahiri. We miss all of you and our deepest obligation to each one of you. Over now to Bodhayan.
After such a lovely evening of poetry, for Srijan, poetry is love and love is poetry. Kolkata is also a cultural center of great importance in India. Hence, this poetry meet will be forever remembered in the 20 years of Srijan's journey. Srijan long been a renowned cultural center that has worshipped creativity more sincerely than most. It has also encouraged multiculturalism and also multilingualism. I thank all the participants from the bottom of my heart and from the bottom of the heart of Srijan itself, especially poets from other parts of India who have now become ours. We'll forever be indebted to them for their presenting this lovely evening to us. I also thank the poets from our own city, Kolkata, who have read so beautifully in 4 different languages. I sincerely thank our tribute pair, Dr. Sobha Chatterjee, who has been an important resource for Srijan from our rooftop days. I also thank each and every one of our poetry team for their immense enthusiasm and devotion to poetry, which has made this meet come true and so successful. And of course, to the great anchors of our show this evening, the indomitable Sri Raju Raman and the poet Syed Kawsar Jamal. Above all, we miss our president, who is unable to be with us, and thank him for his special good wishes conveyed to us through Basan. And of course, to all of you who have joined us tonight, and hope you will join us in every event and in future and carry Srijan's goodwill to your friends. Jai Hind.
Thank you, Bodhayan. And I have a special thank you also to our friend from who is sitting in England, Matthew Belmont. And we all of us remember you fondly when you were in Kolkata. And we do hope to see you in many other meetings now. Thank you, all of you. Thank you, Raju, very, very much. Thank you, Jamal. And most of all, thank you, Sobha. You have been very kind, and your recitations have really carried the evening. They have been so profoundly felt and delivered that it is very seldom that in Srijan we have heard such beautifully delivered poetry. Thank you very, very much, Sobha. Bye bye, all of you.